He told me I could come to dinner, just not as his sister. I said yes before he finished the sentence. Not because I agreed. Not because I understood. But because I wanted to see how far he would go if I let him. Daniel has always been careful with his words. He doesn't say cruel things directly. He edits them. Softens them. Wraps them in something polite enough to pass as reasonable. It's just for tonight, he said. It's important. I remember the pause before I answered. The way he waited. Not for my opinion. For my compliance. Of course, I said. I wouldn't want to complicate anything for you. He exhaled like I had just done him a favor. Like I had just proven something about myself that made his life easier. He didn't ask if I was comfortable. He didn't explain why. He just moved on to logistics. Time. Location. What to wear. Not who I was. That part had already been decided for me. I arrived 10 minutes early. I always do. It gives me time to observe before anyone expects me to perform. The restaurant was private. The kind of place that doesn't advertise. You either know it or you don't. Soft lighting. White linens. Glassware that catches just enough light to remind you what everything costs without saying it out loud. I gave my name at the front. The host checked the list. Smiled. Then hesitated. Just for a second. Of course, she said, correcting herself. Right this way. I followed her through the room. Past the main table. Past the people who would matter tonight. To the back. Near the kitchen entrance. A smaller table. 2 chairs. One already set. The other untouched. If you need anything, she said. I nodded. I'm sure I will. I sat down and placed my hands in my lap. The way I always do when I know I'm about to be underestimated. It keeps them from saying too much. Daniel arrived shortly after. Perfect timing. Perfect posture. He scanned the room the way he always does. Checking who was watching. Adjusting himself accordingly. When he saw me, he smiled. The kind of smile you use when everything is going according to plan. He walked me past a group of guests. His hand lightly on my shoulder. Guiding. Positioning. Introducing. This is Tige, he said. A family friend. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at them. Measuring their reaction. Making sure the sentence landed the way he intended. I smiled. Nodded. It's nice to meet you. No one questioned it. Why would they? The label was clean. Simple. Easy to accept. A family friend doesn't require explanation. A sister might. He said it again at the next table. Tige. Family friend. The second time was smoother. Rehearsed. By the third, it sounded natural. Like something that had always been true. I let him finish every introduction. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct him. Because identity isn't something you defend in a room like that. It's something you let people misread, until it matters. He walked me back to my seat. The one near the kitchen. This is best, he said quietly. Just for tonight. I looked at him. Not long enough to make him uncomfortable. Just long enough to let him know I heard what he meant. Of course, I said. You should always present things the way you think they'll be understood. He nodded, relieved by my tone. He thought I agreed with him. That was the first mistake. The room filled slowly. Laughter built in layers. Glasses touched. Names circulated. I stayed where I was. Watching. Listening. Collecting. A woman at the table next to mine glanced over. So how do you know Daniel? She asked. Her tone was casual. Curious in the way people are when they don't expect the answer to matter. I met her eyes. Smiled. We've known each other a long time. She nodded. Satisfied. Not because she understood. But because she didn't need to. That's the thing about rooms like this. People don't look for truth. They look for consistency. And Daniel had already given them that. I adjusted my napkin. Took a sip of water. Let the moment settle. There's a specific kind of silence that comes with being erased politely. It isn't loud. It doesn't draw attention. It just rearranges you. Moves you slightly out of frame. I've learned not to fight it. Not immediately. Because the more carefully someone removes you, the more precise the correction has to be later. And tonight, I could already feel it. Something was going to shift. Not because I forced it. But because someone else would notice what Daniel was hoping no one would. And when they did, the word friend was not going to hold. I watched the room settle into itself the way it always does when everyone believes they understand their place in it. Conversations found their rhythm. Laughter rose and fell in predictable patterns. Glasses touched. Names repeated. No one questioned the arrangement because nothing about it appeared broken. That is the thing about controlled environments. They do not look like control. They look like order. A server approached my table with a menu I had not asked for. He placed it in front of me carefully, as if the gesture itself needed to be precise. "Can I start you with something to drink?" he asked. I looked up at him. "Water is perfect, thank you." He nodded, relieved by the simplicity of the answer. People expect complication when they are unsure where to place you. Simplicity makes them comfortable. I let him leave before I opened the menu. Not because I needed to read it. Because timing matters. Across the room, Daniel was speaking with a group near the center table. His posture had shifted. More relaxed. More confident. He had built the scene he wanted, and now he was living inside it. I watched him laugh at something someone said. Not too loud. Not too long. Just enough to show engagement without losing control. He has always been good at that. Knowing how much of himself to reveal to get exactly what he wants. A woman from earlier returned to my table. She held her glass loosely, like she was not entirely sure why she had come back. "So," she said, tilting her head slightly, "you have known Daniel for a long time?" I folded my hands on the table. Long enough to understand what matters to him. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "He seems very driven." "He is," I said. "He knows how to build the right version of a moment." She paused at that. Just long enough to feel it. "And you?" she asked. "What do you do?" I let the question sit between us for a second. Not to create tension. To choose the answer. I make sure the right people find each other when it matters. Her brow shifted slightly. Not confusion. Recognition that she did not fully understand. "That sounds important." I gave her a small smile. "It can be." She nodded again, this time slower, then glanced back toward the main table. "Well, it was nice meeting you." "You too," I said. She left with the same uncertainty she arrived with. Not because I had hidden anything. Because I had not explained it. The room does not reward explanations. It rewards presence. I picked up my glass when the water arrived. Cold. Clear. Predictable. I took a small sip and set it down in the exact same place. Small details anchor perception. People notice consistency even when they do not realize they are noticing. A man from another table looked over briefly. Not at me directly. At the space around me. Trying to understand why someone seated at the back was not behaving like someone at the back. I met his glance for a second. Just enough. Then looked away. You do not hold eye contact in a room like this unless you want to start something. And I was not starting anything. Not yet. The first course was served at the main table before it reached mine. Timing again. Everything moved outward from the center. I watched the plates arrive, one by one, like a quiet confirmation of hierarchy. When mine finally came, it was correct. Careful. No mistakes. The server placed it down and gave a slight nod, as if acknowledging something he could not name. I thanked him. Always. Respect travels faster than recognition. Across the room, Daniel raised his glass. The sound of silverware softened. Conversations paused. He stood just enough to be seen without making it feel like a speech. Thank you all for being here tonight, he said. His voice carried. Controlled. Warm. This means a great deal to me. He turned slightly toward his fiancée. His expression shifted again. Softer now. Designed to be witnessed. And to your family, he added, I am honored. There it was. The alignment. The reason for every adjustment. Every introduction. Every omission. I watched the table respond. Nods. Smiles. Approval moving like a current through the room. Then someone asked a question from the main table. I could not hear it clearly, but I saw Daniel's reaction. A brief pause. A recalculation. She is here tonight, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the back without looking directly at me. A friend of the family. The words landed again. Lighter this time. Easier. The room accepted it without resistance. I set my fork down quietly. Not because I had lost my appetite. Because repetition changes weight. The first time a label is used, it introduces a narrative. The second time, it reinforces it. By the third, it becomes truth for everyone who benefits from believing it. I rested my hands in my lap again. The same position. The same stillness. A pattern. Patterns are easy to overlook until they are broken. And somewhere between the second course and the shifting of chairs, I felt it. Not a sound. Not a movement. A change in attention. Subtle. Precise. The kind that does not come from curiosity. It comes from recognition. I did not turn immediately. You never turn immediately when something important enters a room. You let it settle. You let it reveal itself. Then, slowly, I lifted my eyes. And the atmosphere had already begun to adjust. I did not expect to find you here. I looked up at him, just enough to meet his eyes without breaking the rhythm of the room. Good evening, I said, my voice calm, measured, exactly where it needed to be. It has been a while. He held my gaze for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod. Not acknowledgement. Respect. The kind that is earned in rooms that do not look like this one. Too long, he replied. Around us, the silence continued to spread. Not forced. Not announced. It moved quietly from table to table as people began to understand that something they had overlooked was no longer willing to stay overlooked. I could feel Daniel before I saw him. The shift in his movement. The change in his breathing. He stepped closer, not fast enough to seem rushed, but not slow enough to seem composed. Sir, he said, inserting himself just slightly into the space between us, his voice carefully controlled. I see you have met, he hesitated. Just for a second. Long enough for the absence to be noticed. He did not know which version of me to present anymore. The man beside me did not look at him immediately. He kept his attention on me, as if Daniel had spoken from a different part of the room. Yes, he said evenly. We have met. Then, finally, he turned his head. His gaze settled on Daniel. Calm. Direct. Unmoved. I am surprised you did not mention her. There was no accusation in his tone. That made it worse. Daniel smiled, but it did not settle into place the way it had earlier. Of course, he said quickly. Tige has always preferred to keep a low profile. I let the sentence land. Let it breathe. Then I spoke. I prefer to be precise, I said softly. Not correcting him. Not challenging him. Just clarifying. The man's expression shifted slightly. Not amusement. Recognition again. That has always been your strength, he said. Behind him, a few guests exchanged glances. Quiet ones. Careful ones. The kind people share when they realize they are missing context they should have had from the beginning. Daniel adjusted his stance. Tige has been very focused on her work, he added, as if offering an explanation that might restore balance. We do not always see her as often as we would like. I imagine that is intentional, the man replied. Simple. Direct. Daniel nodded, but his eyes flickered for a fraction of a second. Uncertainty. He was recalculating. Trying to understand which version of the evening he was still in control of. I folded my hands on the table again. The same position. The same stillness. You have been well? I asked, turning my attention back to the man. He inclined his head slightly. Very well. And you? Busy, I said. But that tends to mean things are working as they should. He gave a quiet, approving nod. I would expect nothing less. A chair shifted somewhere behind him. Then another. People were no longer pretending not to listen. The room had reorganized itself without anyone giving the instruction. Daniel glanced back toward the main table, then returned his attention to us. We should all sit, he said, gesturing lightly, as if the moment could be softened by returning to structure. The man did not move. In a moment, he said. His eyes moved across the table in front of me. The place setting. The position. The distance from the rest of the room. Small details. None of them accidental. You chose this seat? He asked. I shook my head slightly. It was chosen for me. He looked back at Daniel. Not sharply. Not confrontational. Just aware. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. There are moments when explanation does more damage than silence. This was one of them. I lifted my glass. Took a small sip. Set it down in the same place. Consistent. Controlled. It is a good vantage point, I added. You can see everything without being expected to comment on it. A few people near the main table shifted again. That sentence reached further than the others. It always does when the truth is simple enough to sound polite. The man exhaled lightly through his nose. Not quite a laugh. Not quite approval. Something in between. You always did understand positioning, he said. Daniel forced a small smile. We were just about to begin the next course, he said, trying again to guide the evening back to where he wanted it. Please, join us. The man did not look at him. He looked at me. Would you care to move? He asked. The question was simple. The implication was not. I held his gaze for a second. Then another. Not long enough to challenge. Just long enough to choose. I am comfortable here, I said. For now. He nodded once. Accepting the answer without pushing further. That was the third thing I remembered about him. He does not force outcomes. He allows them to reveal themselves. He stepped slightly to the side, but did not return to the main table. Not yet. And behind him, I could feel it fully now. Daniel standing still. Not because he wanted to. Because he did not know where to move without making the situation worse. The room had not exploded. There had been no scene. No raised voices. No accusations. Just a quiet shift in understanding. And in a room built entirely on perception, that was enough. He did not return to his seat, and that was the part no one knew how to process. In a room like that, movement has meaning. Where you stand. Who you stand beside. When you choose to sit. He remained where he was, just off the edge of my table, as if the rest of the evening could wait until something unspoken had been resolved. Daniel noticed it too. Of course he did. His entire sense of control depended on reading those signals faster than anyone else. Please, Daniel said again, softer this time, stepping slightly closer, everyone is waiting. The man turned his head just enough to acknowledge the statement. They can wait, he said. Not dismissive. Not rude. Just certain. That was all it took. A few guests shifted in their seats. Someone set their glass down a little too carefully. The kind of small sounds people make when they are trying not to draw attention to the fact that something has already drawn it. I watched Daniel's posture change again. Not outwardly. Only if you knew him. His shoulders lowered a fraction. His hands became still. He was no longer guiding the evening. He was reacting to it. Of course, Daniel said, adjusting his tone, I only meant, he stopped. Because there was nothing he could finish that would improve what had already been said. The man beside me looked down at the empty chair across from mine. Then back at me. You always did prefer clarity over comfort, he said. I allowed a small smile. Comfort can be misleading, I replied. Clarity tends to last longer. He gave a brief nod, as if confirming something he had already known before walking across the room. Behind him, I could see Daniel's fiancée watching closely now. Not with confusion. With calculation. She was not missing what was happening. She was measuring it. Deciding where she stood inside it. That is when the first real question came. Not from Daniel. Not from the man beside me. From one of the guests at the main table. I am sorry, the woman said, her voice polite but edged with curiosity she could no longer contain. How do you two know each other? The room held its breath without appearing to. That is how questions like that work. They give everyone permission to listen without admitting they were already listening. I did not answer immediately. I looked at the man instead. Not asking for direction. Offering him the choice. He considered it for half a second. Then spoke. Miss Monroe has been involved in several decisions that affected organizations I am connected to, he said. His tone did not change. Still calm. Still measured. But the words carried weight now. Not because they were loud. Because they were precise. The woman nodded slowly, though it was clear she did not fully understand. In what capacity, she asked. Daniel shifted again. I saw it from the corner of my eye. The impulse to answer for me. To frame it. To contain it. Tige works in, he began. I spoke before he could finish. Not interrupting. Just continuing. In alignment, I said gently. When interests need to be carefully brought together. The man's gaze returned to me. There it was again. Recognition layered over respect. That is one way to describe it, he said. Another guest leaned forward slightly. So you are a consultant? He asked. The word hung there. Close enough to be comfortable. Far enough from the truth to matter. I tilted my head just slightly. Sometimes, I said. When that is the simplest explanation. A quiet ripple moved through the room. Not laughter. Not confusion. Something in between. The kind of reaction people have when they realize they are not asking the right questions. Daniel exhaled slowly, as if trying to reset the tone. Tige has always been very independent, he added. Careful again. Choosing words that sounded neutral but carried intention. I looked at him then. Fully. For the first time since the man had approached my table. Independence tends to come from being left to figure things out early, I said. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. The sentence reached him exactly the way it was meant to. He nodded quickly. Of course, he said, though it was clear he was not sure what he was agreeing to anymore. The man beside me glanced between us. Not missing the exchange. Not commenting on it either. That was the fourth thing about him. He does not interfere when people reveal themselves. He allows it. Then decides what it means. A server approached again, hesitating just slightly before speaking. Shall I bring the next course? He asked. The man looked at him. Yes, he said. Then, after a brief pause, and please, adjust the seating. The words were simple. The effect was not. The server blinked once, then nodded. Of course. He moved quickly, quietly, toward the main table. Chairs shifted. Glasses lifted. Space began to rearrange itself. No one asked for clarification. They did not need it. Instructions like that are only given when the outcome is already understood. Daniel stood still, watching it happen. Not stopping it. Not guiding it. Just watching. And for the first time that evening, he looked at me not like something he had placed carefully out of view, but like something he no longer knew how to place at all. Chairs do not move quietly in a room like that. Even when handled with care, they carry meaning. The sound is soft, but the message is not. One seat pulled back from the main table. Another adjusted closer. A place setting shifted. Glassware realigned. No one spoke about it, but everyone watched it. The server returned to my table, his posture more deliberate now. Miss, he said, his tone respectful in a way that had not been there before, would you mind joining the main table? I looked at him for a moment. Not to question. To acknowledge. If that is what has been arranged, I said. He nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. I stood slowly. Not rushed. Not hesitant. The chair behind me moved back with a quiet scrape, and for a second, that small sound carried further than anything else had all night. I smoothed the front of my dress. Simple. Neutral. Appropriate for any version of the evening. Daniel stepped forward as I moved. Not to guide me this time. To intercept. Tige, he said, his voice lower now, meant only for me, we can keep things simple. There is no need to, he stopped again. Words have weight. And he could not find any that would not expose what he had already done. I met his eyes briefly. Simple tends to depend on where you are standing, I said. Calm. Even. He exhaled through his nose. Not quite frustration. Not quite acceptance. I was trying to make this evening work, he said. For everyone. I tilted my head slightly. Everyone tends to include different people depending on who is speaking. He did not respond to that. Because he could not. The man was already watching. Not directly. But enough. That was the thing Daniel had not accounted for. Not every conversation stays private just because it is spoken quietly. I stepped past him. Not brushing against him. Not avoiding him either. Just, moving forward. The distance between my table and the main table was not far. 10 steps. Maybe 12. But it changed everything. Each step shifted the room's attention. People did not turn openly. They adjusted their posture. Their gaze followed in fragments. Enough to track the movement without admitting they were tracking it. When I reached the table, the seat beside the man had been cleared. Not the head of the table. Not the center. But close enough that it mattered. Close enough that no one could pretend it did not. He pulled the chair back slightly before I reached it. Not exaggerated. Not performative. Just precise. Please, he said. I gave a small nod. Thank you. I sat. The chair slid in smoothly. The place setting in front of me matched the others now. Identical. No separation. No adjustment needed. That was the difference. Not the distance. The symmetry. Daniel remained standing for a second longer than he should have. Then returned to his seat. His fiancée watched him as he sat down. Not asking. Not speaking. Just observing. People reveal themselves most clearly when something unexpected disrupts their plan. The next course arrived quickly. Too quickly. As if the kitchen had been waiting for the signal. Plates were placed. Silverware adjusted. Wine refilled. The rhythm of the evening attempted to recover. But the structure had changed. And everyone could feel it. The man lifted his glass slightly. Not a full toast. Just enough to shift focus again. It is rare, he said, his voice steady, to see a room reorganize itself so efficiently. A few guests smiled. Carefully. Unsure if they were part of the observation or the subject of it. I rested my hands lightly on the table. Efficiency often appears when people understand what is actually required of them, I said. He glanced at me. Briefly. Approving again. Daniel picked up his glass. To clarity, he said, his tone controlled but not as strong as before. He was adapting now. Not leading. To clarity, a few others echoed. Glasses touched. Softly. I lifted mine as well. The rim caught the light. For a second, everything looked the way it was supposed to. Balanced. Polished. Complete. But that is the thing about appearances. They hold until they do not. A man across the table leaned forward slightly. Miss Monroe, he said, more carefully now, you mentioned alignment earlier. Could you elaborate? The question was respectful. Intentional. Not curiosity anymore. Interest. I met his gaze. Alignment is rarely about agreement, I said. It is about understanding what each side believes they are gaining, and what they are willing to overlook to get it. The table went quiet again. Not uncomfortable. Focused. The man nodded slowly. And when they overlook the wrong thing, he asked. I allowed a small pause. Just long enough. Then someone else notices, I said. My eyes did not move. But the meaning did. It settled exactly where it needed to. Daniel's hand tightened slightly around his glass. Not enough for anyone else to see. Enough for me. The man beside me leaned back just a fraction. Not disengaging. Observing from a different angle now. That is a valuable skill, he said. Noticing what others miss. I inclined my head. It tends to be. The conversation resumed. Slowly. Carefully. But nothing returned to what it had been. Because once a room understands that something important has been misjudged, it does not forget. It adjusts. And as I sat there, no longer at the edge, no longer unnamed, I could feel it settling into place. Not as a correction. As a realization. And Daniel was still catching up. The room did not return to what it had been. It only pretended to. Conversations resumed, but they were thinner now, more careful, as if every word needed to pass through a filter before being allowed into the air. That is what happens when perception breaks. People do not stop speaking. They just stop speaking freely. I noticed it in the way questions were asked. In the pauses between answers. In the way eyes moved, not just to the person speaking, but to the people who might be listening. The man beside me continued eating. As if nothing had changed. That was the most telling part. He did not rush. He did not linger. He followed the rhythm of the meal, but not the rhythm of the room. Those are not the same thing. You have been quiet, he said after a moment, not looking at me directly. I find that observation works better when it is not interrupted, I replied. He gave a slight nod. And what have you observed? The question was simple. The answer was not. I set my fork down carefully. That people are very good at recognizing value once someone else names it, I said. A few guests nearby slowed their movements. Not stopping. Listening. And before that, he asked. Before that, I said, they tend to rely on whatever version is most convenient. He glanced at me then. Brief. Measured. Convenience can be expensive, he said. It usually is, I replied. Across the table, Daniel shifted in his seat. He had regained some of his composure, but not his position. There is a difference. Composure is internal. Position is external. And tonight, those two were no longer aligned for him. His fiancée leaned slightly toward her father. You did not mention you knew Tige, she said quietly, but not quietly enough. The man wiped his hands with his napkin before responding. There are many things I do not mention until they become relevant, he said. Her eyes moved to me. Not hostile. Not warm. Assessing. And she is relevant? She asked. He did not answer immediately. He looked at his glass. Then at the table. Then at me. Very, he said. One word. Enough. The weight of it settled differently this time. Not as a question. As a conclusion. Daniel cleared his throat lightly. Tige has always kept her work fairly private, he said, attempting again to define the narrative. I turned my head slightly toward him. Not sharply. Just enough. Privacy is often confused with absence, I said. They are not the same. He held my gaze for a second. Then looked away. That was new. Daniel does not usually look away first. The man across from me leaned forward again. What kind of decisions are we talking about? He asked, more directly now. The hesitation was gone. Interest had replaced it. I folded my hands lightly. The kind that do not get announced, I said. But still determine outcomes. He nodded slowly. And people trust you with that? They trust results, I said. Trust tends to follow after. The man beside me allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile. That is accurate, he said. Someone at the far end of the table spoke up. Have you worked together recently? The question was directed at both of us now. Not casual anymore. Structured. Intentional. The man answered this time without looking away from his plate. We have crossed paths where it mattered, he said. More than once. I did not add anything. I did not need to. Silence, when placed correctly, carries more information than explanation. Daniel's hand moved again. Slightly. Toward his glass, then away from it. He was recalibrating in real time, trying to decide whether to engage or withdraw. It is interesting, his fiancée said, her voice smoother now, more controlled, how much can remain hidden in plain sight. I met her gaze. Fully this time. Only until someone knows where to look, I said. She held the eye contact for a moment longer than expected. Then gave a small nod. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. The man beside her leaned back in his chair. And tonight, he said, his voice calm, carrying just enough, it seems we all learned where to look. No one laughed. No one responded immediately. Because there was nothing to soften. The statement stood on its own. I lifted my glass again. Took a small sip. Set it down. Same position. Same movement. Consistency builds presence. Presence reshapes perception. Across the table, Daniel finally spoke again. I think what matters most, he said, choosing each word carefully, is that we are all here for the same reason. I looked at him. Not challenging. Not agreeing. Just, present. That depends on what each person believes that reason is, I said. The table went still again. Not tense. Focused. That was the difference now. Earlier, the room had been comfortable. Now it was attentive. And attention is far more revealing than comfort. The man beside me set his fork down. Slowly. Deliberately. Then perhaps, he said, it is time we make that reason a little clearer. He did not raise his voice. He did not signal anyone. But the effect was immediate. Conversations at nearby tables quieted. Chairs stilled. Even the servers slowed their movement, as if instinctively aware that something was about to shift again. I did not move. I did not prepare. Because whatever was coming next had already been set in motion the moment he chose to walk away from the center of the room and toward me. No one asked him to continue. That was the part that mattered. When someone like him chooses to speak, the room does not interrupt. It adjusts. He did not stand. He did not raise his glass. He simply remained where he was, one hand resting lightly on the table, the other still, and let the silence settle into something structured. Clarity, he said, repeating the word Daniel had used earlier, but without the same tone, without the same intention. It is a useful thing to pursue. But only if you are willing to accept what it reveals. His eyes moved briefly across the table. Not searching. Confirming. Most people are not, he added. Daniel gave a small, controlled smile. I think we all appreciate honesty, he said. The man did not respond to that immediately. He looked at Daniel for a moment, then at the others seated around the table. Honesty is not the same as accuracy, he said. And tonight, I believe there has been a difference between the two. No one spoke. Not because they were told not to. Because there was nothing safe to say. I remained still, my hands resting lightly near my glass. I did not look at Daniel. I did not need to. The shift had already reached him. The man continued, his voice steady, measured, each word placed exactly where it needed to be. When I arrived, I was given a version of this evening. A structure. A set of introductions. A narrative. He paused. Not for effect. For precision. And then I saw something that did not fit. His gaze moved to me. Not sharply. Just enough. Or rather, someone. A quiet breath moved through the table. Not a gasp. Not surprise. Recognition. Daniel leaned forward slightly. If there has been any misunderstanding, he began. There has not, the man said. Calmly, cutting through the sentence without raising his voice. That is the point. Daniel stopped. Completely this time. The man's attention returned to the table. Miss Monroe does not misunderstand rooms like this, he said. She reads them. He let that sit for a moment before continuing. And when she is placed incorrectly, it is rarely by accident. It is by decision. The word decision landed differently than the others. It carried direction. Ownership. Responsibility. I lifted my glass, took a small sip, and set it back down in the same place. The movement was simple. Consistent. The kind that anchors everything else around it. Daniel's fiancée spoke next, her voice composed but no longer neutral. I do not think anyone intended to misrepresent anything, she said. Careful. Strategic. The man turned his head slightly toward her. Intent is often less important than outcome, he replied. Especially in rooms where perception defines value. She held his gaze, then nodded once. Accepting the statement without agreeing to it. Across the table, someone shifted in their seat. Another person adjusted their napkin. Small movements. Quiet signals. The room was no longer comfortable. It was engaged. You mentioned earlier, the man continued, now addressing the table more broadly, that this evening matters. That it represents something. He glanced at Daniel again. A step forward. An alignment. A decision. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, he said. That is correct. Then it should be accurate, the man said. Not convenient. Silence again. He did not rush to fill it. He let it expand just enough to make the next words unavoidable. Miss Monroe has advised on several matters that directly impacted organizations I am involved with, he said. Outcomes that required discretion, precision, and, most importantly, trust. The word trust settled heavily this time. Not abstract. Specific. A few people at the table exchanged looks again. This time not subtle. Not hidden. Direct. Daniel's hand moved once more, then stilled completely. He was no longer recalibrating. He was absorbing. When someone in her position is introduced as something less defined, the man continued, it raises questions. He did not look at Daniel when he said it. That made it sharper. Not about her, he added. About the person making the introduction. The table went completely still. No movement now. No adjustment. Just attention. I turned my head slightly toward Daniel. Not fully. Just enough. Introductions are interesting, I said softly. They say more about the speaker than the person being introduced. No one interrupted. No one redirected. The sentence stayed exactly where it landed. Daniel looked at me then. Really looked. Not at the version of me he had presented earlier. At the one sitting in front of him now. And for the first time that evening, there was no adjustment in his expression. No performance. Just understanding. The man beside me leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed again, as if something had been completed. It is important, he said, to place people correctly. Especially when the room is watching. He glanced around the table once more. And tonight, the room is watching. No one disagreed. No one could. Because by then, the structure had already shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But permanently. And whatever came next, would not be built on the version of the evening Daniel had planned, but on the one that had just been revealed. No one spoke after that. Not immediately. Because there was nothing left to clarify. The structure had already been corrected. Quietly. Precisely. Permanently. I let the silence sit for a moment longer before I reached for my glass again. Same movement. Same placement. The consistency mattered. It always had. Across from me, Daniel did not move. Not at first. He sat there, his posture still composed, but something behind it had shifted. The control he relied on was no longer his to manage. It had been taken from him the moment someone else decided to define the room more accurately than he had. He cleared his throat lightly. A small sound. But in a room that attentive, it carried. I think, he began, his voice steady but no longer certain, there may have been a misunderstanding in how I introduced things earlier. He paused. Not because he did not know what to say. Because he was deciding what version of the truth he could afford to say now. I did not look at him. I did not need to. The room would do that for me. Tige is my sister, he said finally. The words landed differently than they should have. Not as a correction. As a realization. As if he had just said something that had always been true, but had only now become necessary to acknowledge. No one reacted loudly. No one gasped. But the shift was immediate. Subtle. Final. I set my glass down again. Exactly where it had been before. That is correct, I said softly. Not correcting him. Confirming. The man beside me did not interrupt. He did not need to. The moment was no longer his to guide. It had moved beyond him. Daniel exhaled slowly, then continued. I was trying to keep the focus on the purpose of tonight, he said. Careful again. Measured. Still trying to maintain something of the narrative he had constructed. I turned my head slightly toward him. Not fully. Just enough. And what did you believe that purpose was? I asked. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. The question did what it was meant to do. It held him in place. He hesitated. Just for a second. Long enough. To bring people together, he said. To create alignment. I nodded once. Alignment requires accurate information, I said. Otherwise it is just positioning. No one interrupted. No one redirected. The sentence settled exactly where it needed to. Daniel's fiancée leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression composed but no longer unreadable. She understood now. Not just what had happened, but what it meant. The man beside me picked up his glass, finally taking a sip. It is a valuable lesson, he said. For everyone at this table. His gaze moved briefly across the room. Especially when relationships are involved. Daniel nodded again. Slower this time. Of course, he said. I understand that. And for the first time that evening, I believed him. Not because he had regained control. Because he had lost it. And sometimes that is the only way people begin to understand the difference between what they intended and what they actually did. The rest of the dinner moved forward. Not smoothly. Not awkwardly. Just differently. Conversations returned, but they carried new weight. Questions were asked with more care. Answers were given with more precision. No one ignored me now. No one could. But I did not seek attention. I did not fill space unnecessarily. I stayed exactly where I was. Present. Measured. Enough. At one point, a guest across the table turned to me again. Miss Monroe, he said, more respectfully now, I would value the opportunity to speak with you further about your work. I gave a small nod. When the context is appropriate, I said. He understood. That was the difference now. People understood more than they asked. Daniel did not interrupt again. He did not attempt to guide the conversation. He allowed it. Watched it. Learned from it. The man beside me eventually stood, signaling the natural end of the evening without announcing it. Others followed. Chairs moved. Glasses emptied. Goodbyes were exchanged. Controlled. Polite. Intentional. When I stood, Daniel stepped toward me. Not in front of me. Not blocking me. Just closer. Tige, he said quietly, his voice no longer carrying for anyone else. I did not think it would. He stopped. I looked at him. Fully now. That it would matter? I asked. He held my gaze. This time, he did not look away. Yes, he said. I gave a small, calm nod. It always does, I replied. I did not wait for him to answer. I did not need to. I turned and walked toward the exit. The same measured pace. The same steady steps. No rush. No hesitation. As I passed the front of the room, I could feel the shift behind me. Not attention. Not curiosity. Recognition. And just before I reached the door, I heard it. Not loud. Not forced. Someone, somewhere in the room, repeating my name. Correctly. Clearly. Not as something convenient. Not as something adjusted. But exactly as it was meant to be. Tige Monroe. And this time, no one corrected it.